So we really don't want to get cost push inflation just because it reduces our productive capacity and we're not really able to produce as much. And the reason why prices are going up is because we're not able to supply. Whereas demand pull inflation, the reason why prices are going up is because there is more demand. Okay, so our second goal is about strong and sustainable economic growth. So a keyword here, written in these big capital letters, is GDP, or gross domestic product. So there's two types of GDP that you'll hear about. There is nominal GDP, which is basically the total value of production in the economy. We're not looking at inflation, we're not factoring for changes in the price, we're just looking at the total value. Then we have real GDP, which is the total volume of production. So the difference between the two is nominal GDP, it's influenced by inflation. So when you calculate the value, that's pretty much price times the number of things you produce. If the price is increasing because of inflation, then we've got an increase of nominal GDP. Whereas real GDP, it looks at the measure in the total volume of production, but you remove the effects of inflation. So you sort of look at last year's prices, but this year's production. So the goal of strong and sustainable economic growth, we want to achieve a rate of 3 to 4% on average growth in real GDP per annum on average over time. So why do we want to have the strong growth? Well, firstly, if we have more production, it means that we also have a greater demand for labor. So more demand for labor means less unemployment. So more people are employed, they usually have a higher material living standards and also higher non-material living standards as a result of having a job. There's also better material living standards. So like I said, if you have a job, you're more likely to be able to afford different things. We're also not falling short of productive capacity. So what that means is over time, we're increasing our GDP. As demand increases, we're also able to keep supply in line with the increases in demand. Next, strong. So we don't just want the strong growth, we also want it to be sustainable. So why do we want it to be sustainable? Well, the reason why we don't want growth of like 20% every year is because we don't want crazy inflation to happen. So we want to keep inflation sustainable, and we want to make sure that demand pull inflation is not like crazy high. We want to keep it in line with our goal of low inflation. There are some weaknesses of using the GDP to measure our level of production. So first of all, it doesn't include non-market production. So this is stuff like black market, cash economy, and households. So for example, black market, obviously people aren't really going to report how much they sell in the black market and what they're selling. So if you are in the black market and you're selling some illegal drugs, you're not going to go and tell the government what you're selling and for how much. Secondly, the cash economy. So a lot of businesses might take cash instead of, bank transfers or those kind of payments. So cash payments, they're very difficult to track. So unless people actually report them, it's quite difficult to know what the payment was for and how much was made. Households. So this is more so stuff where people might do a bit of DIY stuff. So stuff like room remodeling, making their own furniture, making their own goods and services, those kind of things. So that's non-market production, is not recorded. Imputed production, so that's pretty much very much, there's a lot of error. So for example, let's look at the example here with the farm. So yes, the farm might produce a certain amount of produce, but the farm itself might also use some of that produce for its own consumption. So we don't know how much exactly was actually taken out of the farm and given to the economy. Quality changes. So that's really, really important. You might as well get a question on this. So quality changes. If we're producing lots of goods and services and we're always trying to increase our production, we might actually be sacrificing our quality. So what we want to make sure that the quality is maintained, but we're also able to produce more. And obviously there are a lot of other issues. So uneven distribution, like great, we're producing more, but is it even what people want? So that's something. Population size, changes in leisure time. and negative externalities. So remember, negative externalities in production. So if we have all these factories producing heaps and heaps of goods and services, and we're striving to increase our GDP, we might be polluting, we might be using up those resources, we might be destroying natural resources. So those are all things to think about when we're looking at weaknesses of GDP. Okay, so now let's look at the goal of full employment. Okay, so like I said earlier, in these big black words, being unemployed is not the same as being not employed. So if you want to be considered employed, so throughout VCE Echo, you need to be of legal working age, so you need to be 15 or older, and you need to do at least 1 hour of paid work every week. So it's quite a loose term of being considered employed. So first you need to be legally like over 15, and you need to be doing more than 1 hour of work every week. So if you are unemployed, that means you're a person of legal working age, okay? So you're part of the labor force, you're willing and you're able to work, you're actively seeking employment, and you're working less than 1 hour a week. So there's quite a lot of conditions to satisfy if you want to be counted as unemployed. The goal of full employment is to achieve an unemployment rate of about 5% or about 4 to 5%, as close as possible to the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, so NAIRU. It's really, really important that you mention the NAIRU in your definition, because that's sort of the key reason why we have this goal of full employment. How is it measured? So if you want to see who's unemployed, then you look at the employed or the labor force. So that's pretty much employed plus unemployed. Employed divided by the labor force. So labor force is everyone who's employed or unemployed. That's it. Labor force participation rate. That is labor force divided by the working age population. So what the labor force participation rate will tell you, it will tell you how many people out of all the working age population is willing and able to work. Shortfall, so there's some issues with the unemployment rate. So first of all, it only surveys 0.7% of the population. And again, like any statistical analysis, there's going to be errors with it as well. So it might not be representative of everyone, not a great indicator of the economy. Another big issue with unemployment is there's a lot of different ways that you could be classified as unemployed. So there's 4 main types of unemployment. So firstly, structural unemployment. So that's pretty much when whatever skills you have don't match what the employers want. So Holden closed down a few years ago just because I guess the cost of labor is expensive, and if you are now in the car manufacturing industry, there is actually less demand for your skills just because it's not really what employers are looking for. So if you're unemployed because you have skills that are not really in demand, that's structural unemployment. Seasonal unemployment, that's basically if you have skills that are not really required at different times of the year, so at different seasons. So that's like ski instructors, diving instructors, because there's only certain times during the year where there's a lot of demand for those. Frictional unemployment, so think of it like friction. So when you have objects moving, there's friction. When you're moving between different jobs, there's friction. So that's basically when you're temporarily unemployed because you're sort of switching between jobs. There's also hardcore unemployment. So that's pretty much when it's because of your personality that you're unemployed. So for example, you find it hard to find a job because you might have some illnesses or some health conditions that make you potentially unsuitable for the job. Or if you have maybe a criminal history that makes employers less willing to hire you. And one more thing I want to highlight, just coming back to structural unemployment. So that can also happen if the skills you have been replaced by technology. So for example, if you are someone who is an amazing cashier, and you're great at working at the register, great, but now we have technology, so self-checkout technology, that sort of replaces the need for people working there. So that's an example of also structural unemployment. And final type of unemployment is cyclical unemployment. So that's basically where we have unemployment just because there's low levels of demand in the economy. So this is something we want to avoid. We don't really want people being unemployed just because the economy is not doing great. And finally, underemployed. So these are people who are working at least 1 hour every week. They're being paid for that 1 hour, but they want to do more hours. So they have the capacity, they have the ability and the willingness to work more hours every week. They're underemployed, but they're classified as employed. We also have people who are hidden unemployed. So these are people who in the past who've been willing and able to work, who've been actively seeking work, but a lot of these people become quite discouraged and at some point they stop seeking work. So they're technically unemployed, but they're not classified as unemployed because they're not actively seeking work.